So Anse Michelle Marie is an Ohio native who came to Islam 10 years ago. She has been a student of Islamic knowledge under the leadership of Anse Tamar Gray since 2013 with the Ribaat Academy Institute. Michelle serves as the editorial assistant at Daybreak Press and has recently accepted the position of manager at the Rabata Cultural Center and Daybreak Bookstore. An accomplished songwriter and a vocalist who attended performing arts middle and in high school and toured the East Coast in college. Michelle can be found writing songs, performing, and teaching workshops across the nation. Michelle enjoys traveling, reading, writing, and spending time with people she loves, especially outdoors. She recently moved back to the US after studying Arabic and Quran in Egypt for 2 years. Without further ado, Anse Michelle.
Thank you so much, Anse Iman. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And for our guests that don't speak Arabic, I just said peace be with you. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I am very excited because I'm going to be talking about one of the best, if not the best woman that has ever walked this earth, and that is Mary. And I am honored to even be able to talk a little bit about her with you all and just to share in that and who Mary was. And my topic tonight is actually Mary's family and her birth. So not the birth of Jesus, the one that we all also know about, the common story, but the birth of Mary herself and how she was just destined from the beginning to be this amazing woman of God. Our prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, tells us that the best of women among the people of paradise are Khadija, Fatima, Maryam, and Asiya. And so you see Maryam falls there. The Prophet Muhammad also said that Mary or Maryam is the best woman of her time, and Khadija is the best of her time. So it is really an honor to talk about her tonight. So one thing that I want to start with is her family. You heard Anse Hala, and for those that don't know what Anse means, because I know we have a lot of people joining us, it's just a form of teacher. So we have our good friend, our good teacher that read Quran for us, and she let us know that it started out with, indeed, God chose Adam and Noah and the family of Abraham and the family of Imran over the world. He chose them to be the best of people. And we started with that verse tonight because this is the lineage. These are the people that Miriam comes from. This is the line, like in her bloodline. She was destined to be a great person already. So we already know, like, she's got these great people in her life, just the ones that had made prayer, that had prayed for their children, prayed for their lineage. Now they have this, a form of answered prayer in Mary, right? And so just understanding that she already comes from a great nation and a great people. And when we go on and we really want to talk about her father Imran and her mother Hannah, some people know her as Anne or Hannah, depending on where you find that translation. But they were elderly in their life and loved by their community by the time they had Miriam. And one thing to recognize is that Hannah, some historians actually say that she had reached the age of menopause. She thought, I will never have a kid. This is it, I am old. How could I ever have a kid? And there's one narration from a historian that she was, on a certain day, she was sitting and she saw a bird feeding her young. So this little bird, imagine a woman, and I know I'm talking to a lot of women here. Imagine your whole life you had longed for a child. You wanted a child. Your husband had wanted a child. You wanted that. You longed to be a mother. And as age came, you just put it out of your mind, kind of. You're like, maybe I'm too old. Maybe, it's at that time. And this story is that she had seen a bird feeding her young, and it rejuvenated her to that feeling again of wanting to have a child. And this speaks, what she did next was pray to her God. and pray to God for a child. And this really speaks to the the belief and the reverence of God that Mary's mother Hannah had, right? This really speaks to that because she wanted and she asked God and she prayed to God for a child. And soon thereafter, she was found to be pregnant. And Imran, her husband, is ecstatic as well. They both wanted a child. So they're so happy. They're ready. They have a child that they're preparing for. And Hannah, in this prayer that she offered to God, said, I'm going to dedicate my child to you. This child is going to be of servants to you. And both parents being so excited for this birth to come, in the midst of excitement along this way, along the journey, and we don't know exactly when in Hannah's pregnancy, but Imran suddenly dies. So Mary's father dies in this journey as well. So now I want you to kind of put yourself in Mary's mother's place, Hannah. She's now has dedicated a child that she doesn't know, male, female, what this child's going to be. She dedicated it to the temple, but also now her husband is gone. She's a widow, and she is prepping, and still she's having trust in God in this, right? She's trusting in Allah. She's trusting that she's going to give birth to a child that will be this mercy and worshiper in mankind, right? And when she gives birth, she's, waiting. She's expecting a boy. She said, I dedicated this child to God. The child's going to live in the temple. So what's going to happen? She expects a boy, right? This is who she expects. Now, I'm going to do a little tangent, a little side note here of her expecting a boy. At the time in the temple, the only people that were dedicated and lived in the temple and lived that life of worship away from everyone else were men, right? So she assumed, like, I promised this to God, so God's going to give me a man because the man will live in the temple. At this time, that was how it was. And then she gives birth to Mary. And Anse, she had said it in the Quran verses she read as well. But interestingly enough, we get to see that interaction between Hannah and God. She's like, God, I delivered a girl. This is a girl. And male and female, they're different. This is a girl. What am I going to do? And I imagine this conversation. I wasn't there. I'm just, there sitting here thinking about the conversation, like, clearly it's a girl. How am I going to give her to the temple? I don't know, that like sense of, I promised this to God. And Allah's response, or God's response, is, I know, I gave you. It's kind of like God already knows. He knew when he had breathed life into Hannah's womb that this was going to be a girl, right? So, and it says, and Allah was most knowing of what she delivered. And the male is not like the female. This is right. And, one thing that I take from this here is that while we know there are obvious physical differences between the male and the female, when it came to that spiritual level, we're in the same field. I felt, we are on that same playing field as male and female in that spiritual realm. And that was kind of how Allah is showing us, like, I know you promised this child to the temple, and I know that it was going to be a girl. Of course, Allah knows everything. God knows everything. And before that life was even breathed into Hannah's womb, he knew it was going to be a girl. And Hannah, accepting of that, says, I have named her Mary, and I seek refuge in her. I seek refuge for her in you, and for her descendants from Satan, from Shaitan, and the expelled, right? And so she is seeking refuge with Allah, with God. She's like, okay, I know now, like I have a girl and this is who I'm going to dedicate to that temple. And she is there saying, I seek refuge in you, God, from Satan, from the devil, and I protect her. I protect my children, and I protect her descendants. And something interesting about that, to recognize as well, is that uh, Prophet Muhammad said, peace and blessings be upon him, that no person is born but that he is pricked from Satan and he cries from the touch of Satan, except for Miriam and her son. So I want to pause there right now. We're going to go back. We're going to rewind it, right? What we're seeing here is that Hannah, in her devotion to God, has some very powerful prayers. Her prayers are answered. She was at a point where today we would call it a miraculous birth. If we had an elderly woman giving birth, we would call it miraculous birth. So we have Hannah praying for a child. God gives her a child. Now we have Hannah seeking protection from God, from Satan, for her child and her child's children, like the descendants of her child. And we have this narration from Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that Satan never touched Maryam and her son, Jesus. So this is some really powerful dua that we have just in this. Now, this is all before Mary is even born, and at the very like birth of Mary, and these duas, these prayers, dua means prayer in Arabic, is a form of prayer or supplication, are being answered. They're being answered. So one thing I want you to recognize about Mary's family is that they have some powerful prayers. And now we're at a point. Okay, so we're going to go back to the story. Now that we recognize that this family has some powerful prayers, is that we're at the point where it's time. Hannah is going to give Mary to the temple to live a life of worship, of her God, right? And it's at this time. But we have to understand too that during this time, the temple was full of men who would be there to protect Mary. She's going to be the first woman in this temple dedicating her life to the temple, who will be there to protect Mary. And this is another example of the trust that Hannah, Mary's mother, had. We know that she has dedicated this child to the temple. But God gave provision for her in that, with protection. Mary was placed in the care of Prophet Zechariah, as some of you may recognize his name, peace be upon him. And what was interesting there is that even in who was going to be guardian of Hannah, people around of Miriam, people around recognized that this young lady who was going to be dedicated to God was going to be something special. So we know that we have narrations of how Zechariah was chosen to be her guardian, peace be upon him. And they had thrown pens and decided, okay, we're going to pull a name, basically, who's going to be the guardian. And Zechariah was chosen, right? Then they decided, oh, that's not it. We're going to throw stones. Which stone will rise? Who's going to be the guardian? And Zechariah's stone rose, right? The rest had sunk, and he was chosen to be guardian. So this provision, or this opening of Mary to have her guardian be a prophet of God, was just the lineup that we had with Mary and her family. Just for reference, Zechariah is related to Mary as it's unsure in history whether he was her uncle, which was the husband of her maternal aunt, or a cousin related in that way, but we do know that there was some familial relation as well. So it was just this guardianship of family being around you, right? And this blessing of family. And while she's under the care of Zechariah, she spent a lot of time secluded in worship. She spent a lot of time in the temple, just really worshiping God. And I know we have some amazing speakers lined up for this week that are going to talk about the worship in Mary and her life there. So I want to talk about her family's reflection of that worship. So Zechariah, and we in the Quran reading, we heard that Zechariah would check on her sometimes, right? We'd go and check on her. It says, so her Lord accepted her with good acceptance and caused her to grow in a good manner and put her under the care of Zechariah. Every time Zechariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found her with provision. He said, "O Mary, from where is this coming to you?" And she said, "It is from Allah. It is from God. Indeed, God provides for whom he wills without account." So by provision, what they're talking about here is Mary had food. She had food. He would enter her like the prayer room to check on her, and she would have summer fruits in the winter. Imagine going somewhere now, like it's winter time, you're not going to find a lot of watermelon, but she just had it in her room, and the fresh winter fruits in the summer, right? Or fresh summer fruits in the winter, fresh winter fruits in the summer. And she just really had this provision, this gift from God. And the reason I want to talk about her family's reflection on this worship is because Zechariah saw her with these provisions and heard the answer of Mary. He heard Mary saying, it is from Allah that he gifted me this. I have this from Allah. And God provides for whom he wills without an account. This was one of those things like when you think about the good that you do as a person, sometimes we think it's just for us, but it kind of rubs off on our family and those around us as well. And at that point, Zechariah calls upon his Lord, saying, "My Lord, grant for me yourself a good offspring." So he saw this dua, this prayer that Mary offered, saying, I have provision. Allah gives to me what he wills. And he's like, I'm going to ask from Allah. I can pray for Allah. And Zechariah is actually said to have been older even than Hannah, and his wife older, and they have yet to have a child. And after he sees these gifts and openings that Mary received, he makes this prayer to God for a child for himself. And that's when God gifts him with Yahya, or John. And he is able to have a child at an old age as well. So this is another miraculous birth. So within Mary's family, we have so many lessons. But if you could walk away with anything and remembering, is that the power of prayer over your family, and that prayer is strong through generations. And when you see that prayer go through that generation as well, you're not sure who's watching and making those prayers too, and seeing the power of God in this. So if we want to think about it, Mary, before she was even born, was dedicated as a worshiper. And because of the prayer of her mother praying for that child that she desired to have. And then Mary, as a baby, was never touched by Shaitan and was protected because of the prayer that her mother had. And then to go forward, Mary's child, Jesus, was protected from the touch of Satan because of the prayer that Hannah had. And then we go forward into this woman of Mary, who was a worshiper and known as a worshiper, and her guardian, or her uncle Zechariah, the prophet, peace be upon him. He sees this, and he is a man of prayer and makes that prayer for a child. And this is why we have John, that we have Yahya that came from that prayer. So as we take these lessons from this amazing life of Mary, peace and blessings be upon him, or peace and blessings be upon her, we remember the prayer that was surrounded by her. We remember the prayers of her family. We remember that nothing is too hard for God. If I leave you with anything, I really want you to think about that conversation that Hannah had with God, and in that she says, "You gave me a female. Like, what am I gonna do?" And God says, "I know. Like, Allahu alam, God knows. God knows what He blessed you with." Right? He knows that this is going to be the blessing, and this is going to be the mercy, and this is going to be the worshiper that you dedicated, right? So when we make that prayer and we're sincere in our prayer, be ready for that answer. I know sometimes we're shocked. We're like, God, I'm praying for XYZ, and He gives you this beautiful thing, right? Whatever it might be. And we're like, you gave me this? And Allah is like, I know, I planned this. I've been planning this, long before this existence. So, just remember that. And for those that are seeking something that you have been waiting for a very long time, remember that miracles still happen. And, I know we're shy to call things miracles now, but the birth of Mary was to an elderly mother. This is a miraculous birth. The birth of Yahya or John to an elderly father and mother is a miraculous birth as well. And so we know that God is capable, and God can do this for you. All it takes is that you taking that step and saying that prayer, reaching out to your Lord. And just think about the things that you can be gifted. Hannah expected to have a son, and instead she was gifted with the best woman to have ever walked this earth. We all pray for righteous children, that when we have righteous children, that they will really just help widen our graves and give us reward in the afterlife. And can you just imagine, all the reward and like widening of the grave that Hannah has because of her beautiful daughter, Mary, and this blessing that Mary had, and imagine also, I think one thing we don't know is we were never in the mind of Hannah when Imran died, her husband. And I know that there are plenty of women out there that are single mothers, and when it happened, how it happened. But this is also a story of a single mother within Mary's own mother, right? Her husband dies before Mary was even born. And yet, from what I see, her faith didn't falter. It didn't waver at all. It was strong. And she knew that even without her husband, who was well known in the community, who was of a great lineage, that I'm still going to dedicate this child to the temple. This is what I promised to God. And I think that strength is something that we can really pull from Hannah's story. She's one of the people that I would love to have a conversation with when everything is said and done and we're in heaven, just to hear her story and how she really held on. Interestingly enough, too, we don't know her exact age, but we do know that she was at a point where maybe she was like, it's okay. Like she had come to a point where maybe it would be okay if she didn't have a kid. And that spark of the little bird feeding its young really brought it back into her that she wanted a child, and God gave her that miraculous birth in Mary. I really do thank you all for having me tonight. It's really been a blessing being here, and I can't wait to hear more about lessons from Mary and her life and her story this week. And we pray peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad. And I greet you all in peace, and thank you all for being